on the top of what was then the Civic Center parking ramp before they turned it into that
Yeah, I remember.
Excel Center. And we had a portable loft fly there, and I flew there. There was like 5 kits there, I think. And Del Seaman won, like he usually did a lot of times back then. He was the only one of all of us that got all his birds back. I got about half mine back and ended up with second place. There was some discussion whether or not I should have been awarded anything, somehow I only got about half my birds back, but I had the second best score. You know, some of the other guys like Dave Eichels, who was a member then, flying portable, he lost everything. Now, Ron Moon was our judge back then. I think Wayne Fetter was a judge back then.
Hey, how was the kit competition rules back then different from today? You think it was better, or?
We were basically learning, you know, trying different things, you know. With portable lofts, a lot of the points were for your having your birds return to the loft, or we used to give a lot of points for kitting. There, you know, we were flying smaller kits back then, you know, anywhere from 10 to 16 or whatever like that, you know, the first few years, and
Yeah.
it was mostly portable loft, and then we went to both portable and you know, home house loft, you know, home lofts, and then kind of lost, you know, portable loft kind of went by the wayside, and everybody was, you know, pretty much flying out of their backyard. One of my favorite flies used to be the senior fly, where the birds had to be at least 2 years old or older to fly. And Bruce Weeks and I, we used to, you know, not as many people would fly in that fly because not that many people kept birds, you know, for that long, you know, as far as holding them over or, you know, putting breeders back or whatever, up in the air or whatever. But I'd win it one year, Bruce would win it the next year, and then maybe I would the next year. And it got to be, we called it the turkey fly, to where the winner had to buy a turkey or whatever for the next year's winner or something like that. But it went with the wayside with some other stuff like the single bird fly. That was really good too. I know. I think Ron Peterson brought that one up to where he he thought it would be really good to go around to people's bird lofts and watch and judge and pay attention to what they considered their best, most frequent, tightest bird at that time, and that was fun. And it was, it could be any colored bird, long as you could tell it, and you could fly with any number of birds, long as you could tell it apart from the other birds. And I won that quite a few times. Matter of fact, I've won it twice with the same bird one time. One year when he did it, they averaged it out that during 20 minutes, he rolled once every 20 seconds. And other years I won it were birds related to him. They were, you know, sons and daughters of a daughter of his, or a son, or you know, a son of his, or whatever, you know. So it was definitely in the breeding. I still have part of that family out there. I think portable loft could be every bit as good.
Okay.
I mean, it's all the birds and how you work with them, and when you're flying portable loft, you got to pay a lot more attention to detail as far as what you're feeding them and who's not, you know, doing a good job of kitting, or who's not, not coming back.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the things too that I wonder if I hurt myself with, is my name bands, you know, by getting birds that I lost, you know, and then getting them back and breeding out of them. Was I actually breeding out of birds that didn't have as good of homing instinct as birds that did come back? I think it, you know, still had pretty, you know, it had probably better than average homing instincts in it then.
No?
You know, when I lived in Vadnais Heights, I had a red check cock that I bought at the 1974 National from somebody down in whatever town that is, that down by Wayne. But anyway, I bought a red check, and years later, well, one time I had an overfly, or that bird overflew. It had a habit of flying above the kit, And I went out the next day, and there it was sitting on the ground. It had flown through all the night apparently until it landed on the ground, and it was sleeping. And I picked it up and put it in the loft, and just closed its eyes and went back to sleep. But I'd sold that bird to a young kid up in Wyoming, Minnesota, and it flew home from his house to my house. So, hoping to think that was pretty good in that one. There was a red grizzle. Was it a red grizzle? No, I think it was a blue bar. Yeah, it was a blue bar badge with bronzing on the bars that I had gotten from Greg Fletcher that he had raised out of a couple of Chuck Hayes birds. And Greg lived in Bandit Sites, probably about 5-6 miles as the crows flies from where I lived. And then Brett Tardif lived in White Bear Township, and he was probably about the same distance from me. Well, anyway, I got this bird from Greg, and I believe I bred out of it one year and wasn't happy, so I wasn't going to breed out of it again. And I just settled it in one day and put a bath pan out, and I wanted to bathe, so it bathed with the rest of the birds and just stayed there and everything. And then, because I wasn't going to breed out of it, I loaned it to Brett Tardif one time, and he bred out, to breed out of. But anyway, it started to where it would come home from Brett's house to my house, and go from my house to Greg Fletcher's house. It was like a 3-way homing system, at least for a couple of times before it finally disappeared. I think it was finally got frustrated enough to where, hey, nobody's going to use me for breeding. I'm going to go find myself a boyfriend elsewhere. In 2000, I joined the NBRC, and I flew in the NBRC flight for the first time ever, and I qualified for a region. Then Roy Edmonds came by to judge the finals, and I did respectable but not fantastic, and he was really impressed with my almonds and the way they were rolling and the yellows and stuff. He's like, he told me, he said, God, you're way ahead of the color breeders out in California. And I said, don't ever call me a color breeder. I said, I like color, but I'm not breeding just for color. And he went on to say, well, if you want, he says, I can put out the word, and you'll have people calling from all over wanting to buy some of your colored rollers from me. And I'm like, please do not do that. I don't want people coming after me trying to buy birds from me all the time. And then it was like 1995, 96. I won a region for the World Cup, and I can't remember who the judge was, but they did phenomenal. I mean, I was the first one to win up in this region. I beat out, and our region was bigger then. It included Kansas and Missouri, and I beat out some pretty good flyers back down in Missouri and Kansas back then. But anyway, I won the region, and the kit was just fantastic. It was like my good kits are when they're really good. It was just really on. I can't remember the score once again. I'd have to go looking, but the judge stayed over the night, and then I told anybody that was interested. I said, "Come on back tomorrow, and I'll fly them again, and then I'll show you it was no fluke." And so a bunch of guys came back the next day. I put them up, and they performed even more. But they did better than they did the day before when I won the region. But I ended up having an overfly and lost a good third of my kit, And then by the time the finals came along and Don Ollett was up judging the finals, well, my replacements for that, what I lost, just weren't even close, so
Yeah.
I didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
But I think that kit could have placed really good. You're right, there are a lot of guys that have a lot of systems that have figured out what they think works for them, best for them, and a lot of them go back to try and do what Mine Evil did with his build them up, tear them down stuff. But I've always found with this family, because they're a consistent family, the best thing to do is be consistent and not try to change anything on fly day. And as a lot of guys have found out, and even, this year in flies, they've, fed them a little less, or, done something different, and the birds
screw 'em
just
up more.
screwed them up to where they didn't fly high enough or whatever. And
Yeah.
so I try not to screw them up, but the only thing I'll do different is I'll try and set them up as far as how often I fly them before, If they're doing really good before then, I'll not fly them for, it'll be the third, on fly day, it'll be the third day, that would have been the third, they would have gone 2 days without flying anyway. I'll do that if they've been really hot in the air. Otherwise, like it's been lately, I've just, because I haven't had a good kit, something that I've had, the same birds going, whatever, I've pretty much have had to fly them pretty much up to the same day, or maybe at most not flying the day before, because I'm still testing out kit birds, which you still want to be doing the day before a fly.
Yeah.
And it hurt me this year because I had that bird that had bumped and up into the tree she went. People have different systems that do work as far as peaking and how long they can keep them peaked and everything. And I guess I've never been that great at keeping records as far as.
They're pretty technical.
Yeah, it gets pretty technical, and I guess I know Dave, from what Dave has told me, and we've read about Dave, about every time he flies his birds, he'll judge them and score them, and I don't do that. I probably should, but I pretty much go out there just to enjoy them, for the most part. I want to be able to concentrate on certain birds instead of just on the certain kid, or, just be able to enjoy them rather than trying to figure out how many are rolling and, how many feet they're going and how many of them are super tight. I'd rather be checking on individual birds as far as checking them out as far as what they're doing day to day, and if they're frequent, their frequency and whatever, There's times I'll mark birds, and then I'll mark on a piece of paper, well, how many times they rolled that day, by keeping track of just say maybe 3 birds during that whole judging time. But otherwise, no, I don't get that involved in it, and it probably shows because I haven't placed as well in a lot of the finals in the world, in the regions for the World Cup and the NBRC.
It has to do with time, John. Time and a lot of patience. So I know.
Whereas with the Minnesota Fly and Roller Group, I used to win a lot of flies. I have a lot of plaques downstairs. I try and work with what I have that's rolling, that's not causing me problems. If there's something that's causing me a problem, all of a sudden it's not kit. I'm going to be taking a chance on whether it's going to kit that day or if it's going to bump that day or whatever. I'll be more apt to not fly that and replace it with another bird. But I'll keep track of the other birds in a different kit too, and see how they compare, and make some changes every now and then. But for the most part, I usually fly the same kit that I've been flying for quite a while. When I've had a good holdover kit that I've kept going. No, not really. I maybe will fly them in smaller groups and try and figure out what's causing a problem or whatever. But I really don't try and tear them down. Every now and then I'll try and get them out of condition because they're in too good of condition. When they start flying real long and real high, I'll shut them down and feed them all they can eat, and then start flying them again. Because otherwise it seems like if you fly them too often, and if you don't feed them don't keep them pretty full, at least with this family, that they'll start becoming marathon flyers, like a marathon runner, get in too good a shape. And that was something I learned from Bob Clark, I think, and Chuck Hayes kind of was to, you know, quit flying them so often, feed them up more and fatten them up basically so they can't fly as long and high.
So your system of carrying high flyers, problem high flyers is if you're having a kit that's constantly flying high, you would actually bring them out of condition by overfeeding them.
Overfeeding them and yeah, not flying them as often.
Why do you think guys think the opposite, that they have to break their birds down to skeletons to make them drop down to a certain time or a certain height?
Because I think that's something that's been told, you know, they've kind of, you know, picked up to where they feel they need to have more control by keeping them hungry, you know. I flew portable loft. I know about having to keep them hungry to have more control and everything, but I think a bird will do all around better if they're at just that right condition. And I think keeping them hungry is just, you know, too hungry is not the way to go, you know, and because with my birds anyway, if I start cutting them down as far as feed, trying to keep them down that way, they'll loosen up in the roll. They'll still, you know, if I'm still keeping, you know, flying them a lot and everything, they'll still fly long, they'll still fly high. And if I have an overfly, you know, because of the condition they're in, they're as good as dead, whereas if they've been fed and watered, you know, I've got some days to where you know, they'll survive and I can get a call from somebody on them, or they've got a chance to come home on their own. As far as feeding for a competition or, you know, everyday flying, pretty much what I do is I'll give them pretty much all they want to eat. But then as soon as I see a couple birds fly up to a perch, then it's time to take the feed away. You know, there'll be feed left, you know, but I figure, you know, they may be faster eaters, whatever, but, you know, or I get lazy and I just leave the feed in there, you know, like if I going somewhere and then I'll take the feed pan away a little later and everybody gets their fill in. But usually when I'm getting serious about getting ready for a fly competition, I'll take it away after, like I say, I've seen 3 or 4 birds quit eating and maybe drink and go up to the feeder. I mean up to the perches, and I guess that kind of goes back to something that I picked up from Dittnauer. It would all depend upon if the kid at the time, if they seem to do better with bigger numbers as far as breaking. But if you know, if it doesn't make a difference, I would go with 16. If I have at least 16 birds, I'll fly 16. I don't want to fly 15 because then if you have that out bird or the bird that rolls down, don't have enough, you know, you've got to give yourself that one extra bird. So you always should fly 15. But yeah, if you've got birds that aren't doing anything, that are going to be distraction to the kit because they don't roll, or they're not very frequent, or they don't kit well or whatever, or they might bump or whatever, don't fly them just to have 20 birds. Doesn't make sense. Well, they got to be stable. I don't like and prefer not to breed out of birds that bump on the way up or on the way down. And I'll never breed out of a real roll down either. You know, a bird that bumps once in its life, you know, I'll forgive that, but any bird that bumps, you know, quite often, I think they should start flying right away because it's the only way they're really going to learn and get experience. I mean, they need to see what's out there, so they're, you know, so they're not always thinking that their birds aren't good enough, or they're not thinking their birds are, you know, better than what they really are. You know, they need to get out there. They need to see other birds fly and compete. They need to, if at all possible, you know, be the scorekeeper or whatever, so they can learn what, and, you know, hear what the judges seeing and counting and everything, or you know, like when our club flies, you know, we, you know, volunteer to score. You know, it's good to learn. I've always been a very big one on types. You know, I was taught that a bird should be a certain type to, you know, get your better percentage of rolling out of them and everything. I was brought up in the dual purpose type era, and I still pretty much believe in that, but I also know that birds of any type will roll, and it's more in the breeding and the control of the person that's handling the birds. I mean, some years ago, and this is going on DVD, but I don't care. Rick Schoening never hears this because hopefully he'll take the positive out of it. But back some years ago when I was judging the World Cup region of Montana, Washington, and Idaho, we got to Rick's relatively late. He was gonna fly. He was planning to fly the next morning, and we were gonna be spending the night. But that evening, he took us out to his loft and was showing us his birds, the family he was flying and everything, and we were handling and looking at his birds, and they were deep-keeled, they were skinny, they were ugly-headed, I didn't like them one bit compared to mine. I was thinking, God, type-wise, basically thinking to myself, I wouldn't breed out of anything like this, Matter of fact, I had a hen like that one year that I bred out of 1 year, but I disliked her so much type-wise that after one round, I quit breeding out of her and gave away the youngsters. Never bred out of her again. She was a kit bird for the rest of her life. But anyway, I was thinking those birds at all, they just weren't type-wise what I thought a good bird should be. Then the next morning he put his kit up, and besides any kit that I've ever flown at my best, they were the best kit I've ever saw. I judged them over 600 points. It was a real eye-opener for me. And it's like, gee, they don't look like much on the ground, but they sure look like something up in the air, and that's the important thing, what they do in the air, not what they look like on the ground. I like a nice looking bird, and, I'm probably, making it harder on myself by trying to keep what I consider a good type up along with good rolling birds, just like I probably hurt myself trying to breed a variety of colors, because I like variety on the ground and in the air so I can tell them apart, so I'm hurting myself that way. Probably want to say that in one of the books that was put out by, I can't remember the author, he interviewed Heine. And it just made me feel so good to read what Heine had to say, because it was so much agreed with a lot of my beliefs about feeding youngsters all they can eat, so they can get that initial muscling that they need, while they're young, babies, and stuff, and about not having to keep them in the dark, to have light in your kit boxes and stuff. It was just so heartwarming to see someone that had done so well in the World Cup to, believe in a lot of my same beliefs. I don't think there's anything really bad about breeding for what's supposed to be the right type, because both, they've always said that, higher percentages of birds of a certain type will be your better performers, and they also say that any bird of any type will roll, which is very true.
Yeah.
And
True too.
but like I gave the example of Rick Schoening. I mean, his birds type-wise weren't, out of all what I would think of a type, proper type, and balanced. They were long cast and, like I said, deep keeled and stuff, but they rolled. He had big breaks. He had velocity, so, but, who knows for sure what the proper type bird is,
Yeah.
Pensum supposedly could pick out the proper type bird, and a lot of what he, but then again, from what you've read over the years of what he wrote, his perspective changed over time too, to where he was picking and talking more of the dual purpose type bird, and so I really couldn't tell you for sure. But I'm still obviously breeding for type, It's not just because I want to do well at a show. It's because I really believe in my heart that, because of over my years of flying this family, I know that they, you know, the majority of them, of what I have